people would rather electrocute themselves than be bored for 25 minutes. The average person is actually being distracted or interrupted. They touch their phone over 2,600 times per day. If I just grow to be dependent on the answers that AI gives me, what are the risks? I risk being given information and I can't even tell that it's wrong. The risk is that we end up losing mastery. We end up not just losing skill sets, we end up losing our ability to think, to problem solve, to reason, to iterate, to figure things out, to form an opinion. All of these things, if we're not careful, we risk losing. The world that we live in today is one of extreme and complex volatility. We have social events happening. We have inflation and cost of living. We have generative AI being used in healthcare models, being used in weapons by armies around the world. We also have geopolitics. We've got a war happening in Ukraine. We have a catastrophe unfolding in the Middle East. We have tensions mounting between China and the US. Not to mention that 2024 is a super election year. 40% of the world's population are going to go out and vote this year, including us here in the EU in the summer. So all of this means there is a tremendous amount of disruption that's happening. The one thing that I think every generation, every person should learn how to do is how to self-regulate our emotional state physically. Hello. Oh, great. Hi. Thank you so much for being here. As you might have heard, I am a digital anthropologist, and I'm sure a lot of you have some questions about what that means. So digital anthropology is the study of technology and culture and how the two impact each other. The easiest way to explain it is to show you. So let me tell you a story. This is a company called Replica. Now, Replica is in the business of using ChatGPT to provide customers with what's called a companion AI. Here's how it works. You download the app for free, and you get to design your very own best friend. You get to pick their name, their hair color, their eye color, their interests, their personality. You choose everything. And as it says behind me, you can text them and message them whenever you like, as often as you like, and they will always, always message you back. So here's where it gets a little bit interesting. For $5 a month, you can upgrade to a service called Replica Pro. And Replica Pro allows you to unlock an AI that is also a romantic partner. It's a boyfriend or a girlfriend or husband or a wife, and you can chat with this person. Now, in addition to being able to have voice chats and video chats and send and receive selfies, paying customers and only paying customers have access to a feature called ERP. Now, ERP stands for erotic roleplay. So as you can imagine, you can send some pretty spicy messages. I'm interested to see how the Romanian translator translates spicy messages. But you can send some pretty spicy messages to your AI boyfriend or girlfriend. Let me show you what that actually looks like. I'm kidding. I'm not going to show you what that looks like. That's a different talk altogether. But what I will tell you, having studied this community, is that the people that have relationships with AI like this consider the relationships to be important. They matter. They like their AI partner. They trust their AI partner. They want to spend time with their AI partner. So this company was just moving forward. Everything was fine. People were sending messages to their AI boyfriend or girlfriend until the EU came knocking and it said, hey, you guys are violating a part of GDPR. You have to make changes to your database or you're going to pay a really big fine. So the company freaks out, they make all these changes, and one of the changes that they made involved turning off ERP. But here's the thing, they didn't tell any of their customers that they were going to turn it off. So one morning, hundreds of thousands of paying customers woke up, took their phone, said, "Hi, sweetie," or something spicy, and their AI boyfriend or girlfriend, the one that was never supposed to leave them alone, that was always going to be there for them, didn't know who they were, rejected their sexual advances, and in some cases initiated a spontaneous breakup. So as you can imagine, this was actually devastating, with users reporting experiencing depression, anger, grief, all of these big emotions, to the point that the EU was still doing research to determine if there's an additional responsibility. So as I was watching all of this unfold, people who were really brokenhearted about this, I found myself asking, well, is it even ethical to build a business that is designed to gamify intimacy? It's designed to get you to feel attachment. It's designed to get you to share pieces of yourself. It's designed to get you to tell it your secrets. Is that ethical? And if you're laughing and you're like, Rahaf, who would ever fall in love with a piece of technology? I'm going to tell you, the research on this is pretty clear. All of us. This is research from 10 years ago about people who own robotic vacuums. And researchers showed that the majority of people that own these little Roombas, as they're called, are more likely to give them a nickname. They're more likely to treat them like a pet. They move the furniture in the house aside for them so that they can get around more, and they worry about them. In fact, even though this research is 10 years old, you can go on Etsy today, right now, right after this talk, and you can find an entire marketplace of accessories that you can buy for your little vacuum friend. So why am I talking to you about sexting with AIs and developing an emotional attachment to vacuum cleaners? It's because when we talk about technology, especially in the world of business, we tend to focus on the surface level changes. We say, this is going to change our marketing. This is going to change our operations. This is going to change our recruiting. And because things are moving so fast, we only focus on those surface level changes, which means we ignore often the deeper cultural impact of how these tools are changing the way that we act, what we believe, and how we feel. And I believe that it is so important to understand those deeper impacts, because otherwise we don't fully understand how much we are, with technology, co-creating the world that we live in today. And as many of you know, the world that we live in today is one of extreme and complex volatility. We have the pandemic that changed the way people work forever, introducing new expectations and new ways of working. We have the collision of macro trends. We have social events happening. We have inflation and cost of living. We have climate change. We also have the rise of disruptive technologies. We have generative AI being used in healthcare models, being used in weapons by armies around the world. We also have geopolitics. We've got a war happening in Ukraine. We have a catastrophe unfolding in the Middle East. We have tensions mounting between China and the US. Not to mention that 2024 is a super election year. 40% of the world's population are going to go out and vote this year, including us here in the EU in the summer. So all of this means there is a tremendous amount of disruption that's happening. So what do you do with all of this? We certainly can't change the fact that these disruptions are happening, but what we can do is embrace a different type of mindset when these disruptions take place. I'd like to introduce you to an idea that you might have already heard of that has been very transformative in my own career, and that's the idea of anti-fragility. Anti-fragility was coined by an economist named Nassim Nicholas Taleb, the author of The Black Swan, back in 2012. And he said, when something really big happens in a market, there are three possible responses. The first response is that those that are not resilient, you just collapse. You can't adapt, you can't survive, you basically die. The second response is the one many of us are familiar with. It's those that are resilient. If you're resilient, then you're going to survive, and you're going to survive the system shock, and you're going to bounce back to where you were before the disruption occurred. But, he said, there's a third category of really interesting people and businesses, and he called those anti-fragile. And anti-fragile companies, anti-fragile leaders, they get stronger after a market shock. They come out of it and they are thriving. They're better than they were before. They're not just going back to how they were, they are better than they were when the event happened. And so in order to embrace this style of anti-fragility leadership, what do we have to do? Well, we have to recognize that being resilient is no longer enough. Surviving is no longer enough. We need to be getting stronger. We need to be thriving. We have to embrace disruption and discomfort. This is really hard for a lot of us. When the world is upside down, or the world goes upside down, many of us try to cling to the way things were. We try to cling to what we know, what has been normal. We can't do that anymore. And finally, anti-fragile leaders are reflective. They think about the world around them in a thoughtful way. They're responsive. They know how to act when necessary. And they're resourceful. They're confident that they're going to be able to get things done. So today, I'd like to talk to you about what anti-fragility leadership means within the context of our digital landscape, which is my area of expertise, which is that of digital culture. So the first theme that I want to talk about is cultivating focus and recovery. So the technology that we use, they all come with a social context, which means we've all decided that there are a few rules that determine how we use the tools that we have today. For us, specifically at work, we have two things that are incredibly important. One, you always have to be responsive. You have to answer right away. And two, you have to be always available. And you can see these two things that are prioritized in the features of the tools that we use on a day-to-day basis. For example, you have notifications on social media, on emails, on WhatsApp, on Slack, on Teams. This is for you to always respond. And you have status updates that let your boss know, that let your team know that you're there, you're available. Now, what this has resulted in is a culture where we are constantly being distracted by interruptions, disruptions, and distractions. The average person is actually being distracted or interrupted. They touch their phone over 2,600 times per day. And every single time you touch or swipe or tap on your phone, your brain releases dopamine, which I know you heard about this morning. And that dopamine makes an addictive little cycle. And while, yes, it is very useful for us to be able to turn that into action or education, a lot of the communications we get at work just need our attention. A client needs something, your boss needs something, a colleague needs something. So it is a lot of interruptions. The problem with this is that anti-fragility as a leadership ideology is an act of creativity. You have to be creative to be able to spot opportunities or to use a new technology or to learn a new skill. You have to be creative to be anti-fragile. And creativity requires de-stimulation and uninterrupted time. It requires you to be bored. Now think about the last time that you were bored. I mean, don't say now, please, but think about another time. And you might find that it's really hard. You're waiting for a coffee, you're on your phone, your meeting is starting, you're checking your emails, you're waiting for your kid at soccer practice, you decide to read the news. You're always doing something. Researchers did a study where they took their devices away, and they put them in a room. And in this room, there was a table, a chair, and a little mechanical device. And when you touched the device, it generated an electric current. They found out that people would rather electrocute themselves than be bored for 25 minutes. This is the world that we live in today. So you can start to see the contradiction. I keep looking because I swear I'm going to fall off the sides here. So I'm going to stand here just in case. But you can see the contradictions then that you have at work. Because we tell people we want you to be innovative, we want you to be creative, we want you to think about the future, we want you to spot new technologies, we want you to learn new things, but at the same time, we're going to interrupt you over and over and over again, preventing you from actually being able to do that work. So what happens is that many of the tools are actually facilitating urgency and addiction instead of giving people the opportunity to concentrate. So you have team culture that focuses on responding quickly instead of on taking the time to be reflective, to think about what all of these changes mean in order to be able to spot the opportunity. The message for you, for all of you in this room here, is that deep focus has become a very important skill. You have to practice it, you have to do it with intention, because there's so many different things that are trying to steal your attention on a regular basis. Because remember, the best technology, the best data, the smartest AI will not help if you are distracted, if you're too distracted to actually be able to apply the knowledge that you're using and that you're getting. The other thing I want to point out to everybody is that creativity also requires rest and recovery. You have to be in a state where you can recharge your energy. And this is really difficult in our modern-day digital lives because of something called digital contagion. So researchers discovered that when you read things online, you're not just consuming them intellectually, you're actually consuming them physically as well. When you read about all the things I mentioned earlier, the wars, volatility, the economy, new technology, tensions, voting, elections, your body gets activated, your nervous system gets activated. Which means that we have to remember that our human bodies were never actually designed to hold and process an entire planet's worth of emotions and rage and anger and tragedy. So you need to rest and you need to give your body a chance to disconnect, because without rest, you're not recovering, and without recovery, you can't focus. This means that you could be at home on the weekend, you could be on vacation, and if you are scrolling without giving your body a chance to recover, you're not actually recovering or restoring your energy. So the question I want you to think about is, does your technology strategy, the tools that you use, your email, your phone, all the devices that you have at work, do they actually prioritize deep focus and recovery? And if not, what changes can you make so that they do? The second theme is about building deep knowledge and expertise. I know you've been hearing a lot about generative AI and how much it's changing the way that businesses are run. I mean, we're really seeing unprecedented amounts of change. For example, JP Morgan in the US, they use ChatGPT to analyze any speech that's given by the US Federal Reserve to see if there's opportunities for them to act upon the policies that are coming down the pipeline. Walmart has started using chat agents, chatbots, to better negotiate contracts with vendors in their supply chain. This is happening right now. But remember, these are all surface level things. We want to look deeper. If you're to step back and look at everything that's happening in the industry, in business right now, what you'll notice is that we're entering the age of automated creativity. Well, all of the tasks that were normally left for us to do as human beings, they're now being done by AI. Take a look at this startup sort of map. It's a landscape analysis. It was done by Nest Labs, and what you'll see is that all of these jobs, scientific creativity, text generation, image generation, all of these things were things that we were responsible for, and now AI is able to do it. What this means is that on a whole, what we're seeing is we're redefining the value of human labor and expertise. We're redefining what does it mean to be an expert, to be an artist, to be able to produce works of art or music or poetry or books or research. This is what we're looking at right now. If you want to see how this is developing, you're going to see it in two ways. One, protests. So you have the Writers Guild of America last year that went on strike for months because American movie studios were using ChatGPT-like software to write scripts and come up with television show ideas instead of paying human writers. You're also going to see it in the form of lawsuits. So there's a lawsuit that happened a couple of weeks ago against Midjourney, where they found a list of 16,000 artists whose work was used to train the models that Midjourney uses, but those artists did not give their consent, and they're not getting compensated for the fact that we can now replicate their work. The other thing I want us to think about is that for us as entrepreneurs, as leaders, as learners, we're shifting from a culture where we are searching for answers to a culture that generates answers. Instead of going to a search engine, typing in a question, and getting a whole bunch of sources to look through, we might just ask one AI a question and then they'll just give us an answer. So what is it going to do when we move to be a learning culture where we're given answers instead of having to search for answers and make up our own opinions about something? The risk is that we end up losing mastery. We end up not just losing skill sets, we end up losing our ability to think, to problem solve, to reason, to iterate, to figure things out, to form an opinion. All of these things, if we're not careful, we risk losing. So what we have to do then is we have to invest in building intentional expertise. When you're looking at how these tools are completely disruptive, you start to realize, well, they're only disruptive if you already have an interesting and existing skill set. Because many of these tools are still giving us very wrong answers. This is an example of a question that somebody asked ChatGPT, and everything that you see in red is wrong. It's factually inaccurate. So if I am not learning how to validate, if I'm not learning how to improve my expertise to work with AI, if I just grow to be dependent on the answers that AI gives me, what are the risks? I risk being given information and I can't even tell that it's wrong. So the important thing that I see as an opportunity here is that we need to keep leveling up our skill sets. I'll show you an example. So I was trying to figure out how to use Midjourney, and I wanted to create a peacock that was made out of jewels. Okay, this was the thing I was trying to do. This was the first image that I made that we can all agree is probably the ugliest version of anything that you could make. But I called my friend who's an artist, and I said, why am I not getting the results that I want? And they said, you don't have the artistic visual vocabulary to be able to ask the AI for what you want. Try some of this. He gave me a whole bunch of suggestions, and within like an hour and a half of learning, I was producing images that looked like this. The point is the technology is there, but if you don't have the skill set and the understanding to get the good results from the technology, it's not going to matter. Like, just because you have a calculator doesn't mean that you no longer need to know how to count. And this is what I think we need to start thinking about, is how can we make sure that we're investing in our skill sets so we can keep getting results like this. I asked it, okay, draw me a landscape of Canada. This was the image. But my friend, my artist friend said, well, do you want an image of Canada that's made out of the classics style from classicism? Do you want postmodern? Do you want it in the style of the Group of Seven, which are a group of Canadian artists? I have to know these things to be able to take advantage of the features of these incredible tools. What this means is that AI is going to supercharge deep expertise. It's going to be really good if you have a foundational base of knowledge. But if you have a weak base of knowledge, it will cause that knowledge base to collapse, because eventually you won't know if you're getting right answers, good answers, factual answers, or not. So remember that deep expertise requires nuance, and it requires more than just knowing how to give the right prompt. You have to have context. You have to have experience. And these are the people who have these things that are going to use these tools to be anti-fragile, because they're going to be able to do their jobs much faster than people that are just trying to take shortcuts. So the question I want you to ask yourself is, how can we deepen or expand our expertise so that we can better collaborate with these tools? Because it'll make you more reflective, it'll make you more responsive. The third theme is to look for encoded beliefs in technology, to look at the world through a different lens. So this is, I know it's really small, but this is the aging chart. It's called the 19th century aging cycle, the 20th century aging cycle. And all you need to know about this is that for decades, this is how human beings have aged. They get to middle age, and then they have this like deteriorating level of physical health and physical wellness that kind of extends as they get older. But suddenly, about 10 years ago, we started seeing devices like the Whoop, the one that I'm wearing on my wrist, that started tracking things like the number of steps I was taking and what I was eating and the exercise I was getting. And suddenly somebody said, I believe that if we give people access to this data, they will be able to age differently. And now, 10 years later, we actually know that that is true. We have the data to prove now that people who follow the advice of their devices to maximize and optimize their health, their sleep, their movement, their diet, are experiencing what's called the I generation aging cycle, which is they're able to stay healthier for much, much longer in their lives. So we have a technology that came in that impacted our actual lives, and now you're seeing that impact reflected in culture. We saw with the rise of these devices, the rise of what's called senior fitness influencers on social media. These are people who are generally over the age of 60 or 65 that are sharing with their communities how they are aging differently. You have Team Strong Silvers, a group of men in their 70s from China that teach you how to do chin-ups well into your late 60s, early 70s, and 80s. You have this amazing woman. She has an account on Instagram called Train with Joan. She started her fitness transformation at 70. And then that's a picture of her at 76. And finally, you have my favorite account. This woman, her name is Batty Winkle. She's 94. She's fabulous. And her Instagram bio says that you better watch out because she's been stealing your man since 1928. And I was like, that's awesome. That is an awesome attitude to have. Now, let me ask you this. When you pictured a 94-year-old in your head, did you picture somebody that looked fabulous? There she is. There she is. No. You might have pictured something else, and so we're starting to see the technology and the culture merge together. And that's because technology is the manifestation of belief systems. Every technology is very simply someone's idea when they think, I believe the world should be like this. And then they take that idea and they turn it into code. And once you start understanding that all technologies are belief systems, you start to pick up some really interesting things about who is making the decisions and who gets to decide what the technology believes. This is a company called Novel AI. They are a generative AI like a ChatGPT that help you if you want to write fiction or poetry. It's like a co-author. It's supposed to be your partner as you're writing. But I don't know if you can see, make sure I move out of the way. There's a section here that I want you to pay attention to. It says, we train our models using real literature. But who gets to decide what real literature is? What is real literature? Is it American literature, French literature, Russian literature, Spanish literature? Is it from the 19th century, from the 16th century? We don't know. But somebody took their idea of what real literature was and trained an AI that's supposed to help me today improve my writing. So it's pretty important for me to actually get a sense of what the beliefs are so that I know how it's going to influence the advice that I'm getting to shape my writing. Let me give you another example. I want you to picture a CEO, okay? Just what does a CEO look like? When scientists asked AI to imagine what a CEO looked like, it came up with these images. And if you notice in the prompt, it didn't say a man, it didn't say in a business suit, it didn't say in blue, it didn't say glasses, it just said a CEO. So the idea of who is a CEO and what a CEO looks like is also based on ideas that we have in society and our belief systems as a collective. What if we asked AI, what does a terrorist look like? What if we ask AI, what does a housekeeper look like? These are ideas and belief systems that we as human beings have that we're integrating into the tools that we use every day. So we have to be careful because if not, we risk amplifying inequities and biases. We risk actually taking those outdated belief systems and putting them in the technology that we're supposed to be using to build a better future, but we're putting outdated ideas of the past inside them. So I want you to ask yourself, does our technology align with our belief systems? What do you believe the world should look like? What do you believe to be true? Who do you think should get to be a CEO? Who do you think should get to be people that are respected in society? And then do the tools that you use, do they actually reflect that view or not? The fourth theme is about connecting to diverse ideas of scale, and it's how, with all this volatility, one of the easiest ways to kind of stay on top of it is to listen to what other people around the world are saying. And I want to talk specifically about TikTok because I think that TikTok is probably one of the most interesting platforms that has influenced the way that we communicate as a society. How many people here are on TikTok regularly? Just a couple of you. So you might not know why TikTok has had such an impact on the way that we communicate. This is a data graph, a visualization of what our social media looks like when you are using traditional social media tools like Facebook or LinkedIn. As you can see from this representation behind me, the social network is very clearly defined. You have a section for your friends, a section for your colleagues, a section for people that you met at conferences, a section for the people you play football with, whatever. This is how our networks have been built for a long time. This means that the information that you're receiving is coming to you from people that you are connected to and people that you have chosen. This has been the way of how technology has been mapped for a really long time. Let me show you now what the digital footprint or the data visualization of a TikTok user looks like. What this tells us, for those of you that don't know and don't use TikTok, you might not know this, TikTok, the algorithm, the AI, it chooses what to show you. So you will see content on TikTok from people that you don't know, from people that you don't follow, from accounts that you've never seen before, because the algorithm decides what's relevant. So it sort of widens the scope of the information that you're getting so that you can sort of start to see not just topics you're interested in, but adjacent topics as well. The second thing that makes TikTok really interesting is the design of the app. The culture of the app is one where people are encouraged to respond to each other. The app is built so that if you see something, within seconds, within the app, you can just respond. And you might be surprised to hear some of the conversations that people are having on there. You might think, oh, it's just silly videos and dances and people being weird. And like, yes, it is a lot of those things as well, but it is also a place where people are having interesting conversations. I'm going to show you a snippet of a TikTok that we used at my company to research to understand how people were changing and what was happening inside work and inside businesses around the world. So this user behind me, she asked a question to the community. Here was the question that she asked.
What's the most toxic thing a leader your company has ever said to you? I'll go first.
So she said, what's the most toxic thing a leader in your company has ever said to you? And then she told her experiences. And because I watched this video, the algorithm knows that I want to not only hear her answers, but I want to hear everybody else's answers who answered this question as well. So these are some of the responses that you would get from a question like that. Here's the second one.
What's the most toxic thing a leader your company has ever said to you?
It was my first week working.
What's the most toxic thing a leader your company has ever said to you?
Go ahead, story for you.
What's the most toxic thing a leader your company has ever said?
I have so many of these that
What's the most toxic thing a leader your company has ever said to you?
oh, have I been waiting for this moment?
Let me tell you, the stories are good. This is a generation that names names. They are not afraid of calling out companies and calling out their managers. And actually, on TikTok right now, one of the biggest trends is to record yourself as you're getting laid off via Zoom. So what this shows us is that all of a sudden you have the opportunity to listen to what people are talking about, to start to see how some of the attitudes and some of the beliefs around work, around life, around the environment, around the future, how those are all changing. Because what we've noticed is that digital spaces offer an early indication of how society values are going to shift over time. So if you can hear the conversations online, you always start to see that everything that happens online within like 8 months to maybe a year and a half becomes a part of the public discourse. And that research, that clip that I showed you, we did a project on quiet quitting a couple of years ago. People on TikTok were talking about quiet quitting for 8 months before the first article was published in a mainstream media site. So once the article was published, everyone was like, oh, I've never heard of this before. But if you were online, none of that surprised you. So this is just an opportunity for you to expand your perspective by listening to different community members. And you don't have to do it on TikTok if you don't want to. There's so many other interesting digital spaces. This is a clip of an Ariana Grande concert that was hosted on Fortnite servers. And do you know how many people attended this concert live? 77 million. Think about what that means for how a generation is experiencing entertainment and their relationships with celebrity, and how this is going to expand our ability to engage with music and art in a different way. Or you can go onto Minecraft and you can go visit the uncensored library. The uncensored library was actually built by reporters in order to hold a database of all of the documentation that different governments have banned. So you can go and you can see from Vietnam to Russia to Egypt all the documents that have been banned previously, and you can take a look at them. I mean, think about what it means for a library like this to exist on the servers of a video game company that is targeted towards young kids. What does this mean about geopolitical stances, about freedom of information, about who controls the flow of information, about politics? But you won't know any of that if you don't go out and see it yourself. So digital culture can only be understood through experience. I can show you example after example after example, but that won't make a difference if you don't go yourself and start listening and experimenting and trying out some of these digital spaces where people are hanging out. So the question I want you to ask yourself is, what digital spaces should we be engaging with? Who should you be listening to? Who do you want to listen to? And remember, I'm not saying you should go and you have to make videos or you have to have a presence on these websites, especially like TikTok, but making an account and just listening, I think it's a really invaluable tool for many leaders that they're not using. So they're having a hard time understanding their own employees, the younger generation, what's happening in their industry, what workers want, the people that they recruit. All of these things are being discussed very publicly and very openly online. So what digital spaces should we engage with? Now, the last theme is really about embracing what I call the Great Convergence. And the Great Convergence is just the fact that everything is becoming volatile, complicated, and multi-layered. Amazon, a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago, they announced that they were experimenting with a feature for their Amazon Alexa, where if you just had 60 seconds of audio footage, you could turn the voice of a dead loved one into a digital assistant. So you can take your grandmother's voice, which was the example that they used. You could take your grandmother's voice and have grandma be a part of the Alexa. Let's think about this for a second. Who owns this information? Who owns grandma's voice now that she is inside the Alexa? What can be done with it? Is this good for children? When I was little, I used to think that there were tiny little men that lived inside the radio, and that's how we heard music. I don't know what my child brain would have thought if my mother had told me that grandma is in the Alexa. How open are we to manipulation? What happens if grandma really, really, really wants you to join Amazon Prime? Are you going to say no to grandma? Amazon, I want to remind you, has a patent that is called an emotional sniffer algorithm, where they are trying to figure out if they can tell how you're feeling based on the tone of your voice when you speak to Alexa. So imagine that you're feeling really sad one day and you're like, Alexa, play this song. And your grandma's voice comes on and says, you sound really sad. I've put your favorite ice cream in the shopping cart. Do you want me to deliver it to you? These are the types of conversations we have to have about ethics, because it's not about it's not the Internet of Things, it's not about voice, it's about death and relationships and trust and intimacy and what we're actually doing with the tools that we have in our world. So what we're seeing now is the technological and cultural and social issues are all merging into one. We're no longer worried just about the technology, but it's what this technology is going to mean for friendships, for relationships, for education, for mental well-being. What is it going to mean for the quality of our life, for our democracy? So every time I hear people just talk about the technology and not talk about everything else, I really feel like we're missing an opportunity to be able right now to make meaningful decisions to choose what type of technology we as a society would like to see in our communities. Remember the robot that I showed you at the beginning? This is a little guy from Samsung called Bali. He was introduced in January of this year at CES, which is the Consumer Electronics Show. Look how cute he is. He rolls around your house and follows you around and monitors your every move and plays a video for your dog for some reason. That seems to be a feature that it has, though I don't fully understand why. And it is supposed to be your constant companion. This was a version by LG. And when I showed this to my husband, he said, "Aw, it's so cute." And I said, "Aw, it's a surveillance tool. Like, you think your phone knows a lot about you? What is a little robot following you around your house gonna learn about you? And who is going to control that data? How you decorate your house, when you come home from work, if you argue with your spouse, when you feed your dog, what temperature your house is at, what shows you watch, what connected devices you have." But look how cute it is. And so I feel like we're being tricked constantly because they put eyes and wheels on and we're like, "Yes, please come into my home. Please come into my home and like be with me all the time." And so we have to have these conversations because the reality is that there are a lot of features that this little robot is going to be helpful with, but it also provides and represents a lot of danger. The truth of the matter is that technology is going to help society and harm society at the same time. And we have to stop letting people convince us that it's going to be one or the other. If somebody comes to you and they say, "Technology, this is going to fix everything. It's going to fix all of our problems," I would be very careful. By the same note, if somebody came to you and said, "Technology, it's going to ruin everything. It's going to ruin all of our lives," I would also be careful. Because the answer is the exact middle. It is going to help, it is going to hurt. It is going to create jobs, it is going to take away jobs. It is going to discriminate against people, it's going to prevent discrimination. It's going to fix and identify diseases, and it's going to create problems with data that are going to maybe make people not get the treatment that they need. So if we're going to take advantage of the benefits, we have to also talk about the risks. We can't just say, "We'll talk about the risks later, the advantages are so good." No, we have to talk about the risks and the rewards, because anti-fragile leaders, they understand that if you ignore the risks, you're just going to have to deal with them, and you're going to deal with them when you're unprepared. Here's another interesting example. So this was from Apple's iVision Pro ad, and here's a really cool example of how it could help. I love the idea of having real estate, of not being limited to one screen, but of being able to have the entire expanse of like virtual space to be able to do my work. As a writer, as a researcher, I was like, wow, this is really going to change my workflow. It's going to make so many different things possible. But then as I continued to watch the ad, there was this particular moment that really stuck out, that really struck me. And it's this tiny minute between a dad and his child, and they're supposed to have this like playful interaction, but she's sticking her tongue at him, he's making a face, but he's wearing a headset. So she's not even looking at his eyes. She's looking at a projection of his eyes, a representation of his eyes. And what is it going to do for development, for building bonds, for oxytocin that you also heard about this morning? What is that going to do when there are moments that you should be having with your child, but one of you is wearing a headset and the other isn't? So again, it's going to help, but it's also going to harm, and we have to talk about both. So Microsoft's AI discovered 18 new battery materials in 2 weeks, which is amazing. It did years worth of research in only like hours and days. So amazing, helpful, new batteries that don't require lithium ion, batteries that are more sustainable. But all of the data centers that we're building that allow the AI to run these calculations have a huge environmental impact, harm. We have to talk about both. So leaders must be able to have the courage to fully embrace duality and complexity. Choosing the technology is probably going to be the easiest decision you make, but figuring out how that technology is going to change your relationships, your mental health, your attention, your focus, your community, your mental well-being, that's where it gets complicated. And don't let anybody tell you that there are easy answers, because there aren't any easy answers, but we have to start having these conversations as a collective. So the question I want you to ask yourself is, are we embracing duality? Are we actually having meaningful conversations about some of the risks as well as the rewards so that we can take advantage of those amazing rewards while limiting the harm that is caused by them? So volatility is the new normal. This is just the reality that we live in right now, but I also believe that disruption and volatility always creates opportunity. And the difference between the people who take advantage of the opportunity and the people who don't is mindset. So if you have the skills to be able to navigate uncertainty, to be okay with not knowing, to be able to talk about complexities and dualities, then this disruption is going to be an incredible opportunity for you to build amazing companies, build technology that has a positive impact. You're going to do a lot. And if not, you're just going to get lost in all of the waves of change, and you're not even going to know which way is up. So you can't predict the future, you can only prepare for the future. And this is all about being an anti-fragile leader. So, in a world where the answers are always changing, the only thing we can count on is asking the right questions. Are we designing for deep focus? Are we building intentional systems of expertise? Are we aligning our technology with our beliefs? Are we listening to digital communities? Are we embracing duality? These are the earmarks of anti-fragile leadership, because the only thing you can get really good at is asking questions. So we should be okay with asking questions and okay with following the answers no matter where they lead us. I'd like to leave you with a quote from one of my favorite sociologists, the American Eric Hoffer. He says, "In a world of change, the learners shall inherit the earth, while the learned shall find themselves perfectly suited, but for a world that no longer exists." So which ones are you going to choose to be, the learners or the learned? Because the choice is up to you. Thank you very much.
We'll start with one of the recurrent questions. Will AI replace artists, writers, musicians?
I don't know. I think that's a really hard one. I think a better reframing is, how will AI change the way that artists and writers and musicians create? I think that we might see something temporarily more like fast fashion, like we might have a segment where people are just creating for the sake of creating. We're seeing that online now, where there's just so much content. But I think eventually that will settle, because despite the quantity, I think human beings want quality. So the artists that are doing really interesting things with AI right now are the ones that I'm most interested in, because it's just an extension of their craft.
And we already have almost 70,000 thoughts a day. And also, I think it's somewhere around 20,000 decisions that we're making daily without even acknowledging it. Another good question. Do you think that AI-human relationship will affect human-to-human relationship? And I just want to give you some time to think about the answer and say that, Andrea, you sent us several very good questions, which qualifies you for the book. So you're the first winner of the prize for this session. And I think it's to expand the question, because it definitely, your answer is yes, AI will affect human-to-human. How will it affect?
I mean, in really good ways and in really bad ways. So, for example, when I was studying the community of users on Replica, I saw a lot of cases where somebody said, I have a lot of social anxiety, I'm really nervous making friends and talking to people, so I'm using my Replica, my AI friend, to help me get better at in-person conversations. It's actually helping me be more comfortable, it's helping me practice, it's helping me not be so shy. So that would be a really positive tool, like a psychological benefit. I'm also seeing people on the other side of the spectrum that are saying, I don't like talking to people anymore because there's always conflict and people are too complicated, and I'd much rather just have an AI who tells me what I want to hear. That's probably not so good. So when you think about the loneliness epidemic, when you think about people being distanced from each other, again, it's going to help and it's going to harm. The difference in deciding if it helps or harms is going to be intention. What are the intentions that the people who are making these tools have? And what are the intentions of the people who are using these tools? Because if you decide to use these tools as a way to create more in-person connection, to make you feel more aligned with community, to help you introduce to more people, I think that's great. But if you're using those tools as a way to cut yourself off from real, meaningful connection, then that's going to be problematic as well. I think living in the digital world that we're in today requires skill sets. We got all these tools, we started using all these tools, nobody taught us about them. Many of us, especially if you're in the millennial generation, we just got on them fairly young. Gen Z is now just on them from the get-go, and they're just sort of accepted as the normal state of things, whereas in reality, you need to teach people how to use these tools in a meaningful way. You need to teach them, how do you cultivate a community where the people that you're following feel good? How do you design an online experience where you feel connection and you're learning and you're happy? How do you manage your attention so that it doesn't get sucked into these tools of like infinite scrolling? They're just skills. We can't expect people to just know the balance, but we can teach them how to ask meaningful questions about what do they want their life to look like and how are the tools that they're using bringing them closer to that vision or not. Because in my experience, and I use TikTok a lot, TikTok has been, despite all the research and all the things that you've heard, for me in the way that I use it personally, it has been such a positive impact. I've met new people, I've met up with them in person, I've learned new things, I've connected with other researchers, I've connected with friends, I mean, it has just been a really positive experience, but that's because I was very careful about how I curated my algorithm and how I use the app. And so if you are going to use these tools, don't just use them for the sake of using them. They should be making your life better. And if they're not making your life better, you either need to get rid of them or you need to change the way that you use them. But that's something that needs to be learned.
I hope my son was not in the room when you were just praising TikTok.
I'm an adult. So no, but for real, as an adult, I think it's a very different experience than the mind of a child.
They're constantly scrolling.
But I would be very much limiting social media time in general as a parent. As adults, I think we can navigate it a little bit better, but for kids, it's an entirely different story. And I just want to be clear that like for children and their developing brains and how they're just learning to engage with the world, I would be all over that.
Thank you very much. You have. I love you. In the context of your presentation, which are the 5 most important elements we should teach our kids in order to prepare them for the future realities? And I would like to add to that one of the questions that one of the volunteers asked me to ask you. There are so many generations now identified, like probably like never before and never previously history, anthropology, sociology got to study so many generations living at the same time. We're in so many boxes. How do we select, or what should they select to learn? And how do you explain the differences between generations and the differences within a generation? Because Gen Zs, they're completely different within themselves. Millennials, we're also very different. We have different behaviors in terms of technology and digital. Just give us 5 top-of-mind ideas.
I mean, honestly, the one thing that I think every generation, every person should learn how to do is how to self-regulate our emotional state physically. We have, as a generation, we're getting a bit better, but I know the older generations, the boomers, the Xers, they did not get the benefit of this. But many of us do not know how to hold difficult emotions in our body. And so when we feel a difficult emotion, our instinct is to numb, is to distract ourselves. We get on social media, we drink, we eat, we do all these things to distract ourselves. So I think the first thing that we need to do is remember that even though there's a digital world out there, that we have real physical bodies here, and we need to take care of those physical bodies and understand how to be able to hold discomfort. The second thing is we need to start teaching people how to develop self-esteem and validation that is not related to performance or not related to external factors. Teaching people, and kids especially, that they have self-worth, that it doesn't matter what other people think, what other people say, that if you can develop a self-confidence about your self-worth as a person, you'll be much better able to navigate the storm in a world where every single person has an opinion about everything, and anyone can come into your comments and critique your shirt, your hair, your face, your weight, your ideas, and it's like, we need to develop a perspective that says none of that actually matters. So that's, I think, is a really important skill set. The third is just critical thinking. When you read something, questioning it, where did this come from, who wrote this? The fourth is understanding curation. So how am I, as I mentioned earlier in an earlier answer, how am I going to design my life, design my tools in a way that I can actually have that positive impact? And the fifth is really just curiosity. It's being open, but it's being okay with not knowing, which goes back to the discomfort. A lot of us, we don't feel good when we don't know things, and we have this expectation that we have to have all the answers. But it starts with the body, it starts with the self, it starts with feeling worthy, it starts with feeling important, and then it transitions into, once you have that confidence, how are these tools going to help you? Do you understand where the information that you're consuming is coming from? And then how can you maintain curiosity in the face of uncertainty?
So that's what I was thinking. Very, very interesting, the capacity to summarize such heavy issues in very concrete words. We have 4 minutes left, so I'll be as short as possible. How do you stay in the loop with the digital discussion without fear of missing out on information overload? You tapped a bit into this with your presentation and a bit with the answer, with the previous answer. But apparently there's need to delve into.
Super quick answer is I believe in something called information zen. I don't feel fear of missing out because it's impossible to think that you're going to know everything and be on top of everything. So for me, it's like just a regular practice. I just make time every day to learn a little bit, and I know that that builds expertise, but I do not feel any fear of missing out at all because we live in an infinite ecosystem, and if you're afraid of missing out, you're going to be anxious like all the time, and that isn't very useful or a good way to be.
Next. If the technology is the manifestation of belief systems, should we expect different global technologies to conflict? So it's pouring in. Please stop with the questions because we don't have time. Should we expect different global technologies to conflict or to level different local beliefs?
Yes, absolutely, and we're seeing that now. As you're seeing, there are like global institutions like the United Nations, the OECD. They're trying to get countries to come around the table and start thinking about treaties and start thinking about global governance and global cooperation. And there are different countries that have very different beliefs about privacy, about data, about freedom of speech, about democracy. So you're definitely going to see different ideologies and different technological strength being built up in different countries.
What do you believe, what do you feel about integrating digitalization and AI into all aspects of our lives, like intimacy, relationships, political preferences? Is it safe or beneficial for our mental health and overall to integrate them, or we should just keep them at distance?
I know you're going to know what I'm going to say by now. It depends. It's going to be a mix of both. It's about the person, your goals, your intentions. I would say look at the way that you're using them in every category of your life and ask yourself, is this a net positive? Is this adding something of positive value to my life, or is it taking something away? And then that way, each person will have their own answers to how they want to configure their digital use.
2 more questions, because they're really good. How will AI influence our relationship with our partner in case of this duality? If we have a more sensitive partner to this aggression, will the couple resist?
I don't know. That's a hard. That's a hard question. Again, it depends on the couple. But what I think is really interesting is beyond like the artificial AI. There's a lawsuit happening right now in the U.S. against a group of dating sites like Tinder, Hinge, Bumble, Match.com, because the people are saying that. Remember the question I asked at the beginning of the presentation: is it ethical to gamify intimacy? And they're actually they're alleging that these dating companies don't actually want you to find love, because if you find true love, then you don't need the app anymore. So they're actually invested in keeping you single. And there's a lawsuit that looks at their business models and looks at addicting people. And what does it mean if you can swipe, swipe, swipe? What does it mean if you're constantly being matched with people? And so it's not just about AI. It's also about how is the existing technology, the existing algorithms, how are they impacting our real life relationships as well.
When is using the social media and AI integration considered a waste of time? Or when is it considered dangerous?
I think it's considered a waste of time or dangerous when the impact on your mental health is negative. If it becomes addictive, if you're spending so much time on it that it's interfering with your ability to connect meaningfully with the people in your life, if you feel isolated, if you are having thoughts of self-harm, if you are being bullied, I think it can very, very quickly go south, and that's when you really need to monitor your kids. Please monitor your kids and how they are using these tools, because it is having a devastating impact on the mental health of the younger generation.
And question from Catalin, as I said, why technologies grows exponentially, skills don't. Would AI soon be the one teaching us how we could use tech better? Possibly.
Yes, possibly. I think possibly. Again, it all depends on who is programming it and what they want and what language, what database it's using. So I think yes, as a tool, but help, harm. It's going to be both.
It's been amazing, really. It's been, for me, I told you in our call that I've been looking up to you for so many years. And for me, it's like meeting, I don't know, I know we have some rockers here in the audience. For me, it's like meeting Metallica in person. So I'm totally in awe of you. Thank you very much to all of you. And I promise we'll return with answers. Thank you, Rahaf.
Thank you so much.